In January, something unexplainable happened to me. I don't know anything about being psychic or anything like that, but all my life, strange things happen. I don't know if it's because I have such a deep bond with my husband, who I've been with for 25 years, but also happens with my mum and friends I'm not that close to, etc. I basically am thinking something and they'll come out with it. The exact same thing. For example, I was sat next to my mum and was thinking how nice it would be to hire a motorhome and go to Cornwall, UK this year. As I finished the thought, my mum said we should all go on holiday to Cornwall this year. Prices of staying places are crazy, so it'd be great to hire a motorhome. A few days later, I sat next to my husband, and again, this has happened so many times. I have a feeling of panic, dread, same feeling I have had every time something was wrong. And one of my husband's friends came into my head. We only see them once a year, so it was odd. Then my husband says, I need to tell you something. Our friend Louise has breast cancer, and it's terminal. Again, I saw this before it happened. There's too many times to say that has happened to me, but this one stays with me the most. I have an auntie that lives 45 minutes away. Very healthy for her age of 74, but was slightly diabetic. My mum calls her once a week to check in. She wasn't very social and always at bingo alone, so it was often she didn't answer the phone. So mum tried the next day, still no answer. Again, this wasn't unusual. By day 3, I spoke to my mum and said I have a bad feeling in my stomach. Dread, panic. Something is wrong. I said to call the police to do a welfare check on Auntie, as my mum couldn't leave my nan, as she's her full-time carer, and sadly Nan has severe dementia. I'm disabled and don't drive myself. Mum said no, because if she's not at home, they'll break her door down, and she won't be able to pay for it. She'll be okay, and she'll be at the bingo. This feeling got worse and worse, and I went behind my mum's back and called the police. They called me to say there was a lot of mail piled up, and I said to go ahead and break in. Sadly, my aunt was found dead on the floor. They said she had started to decompose, so we couldn't see her. She had been dead approximately 1 week, so must have happened just after we spoke the previous week. She had a huge bleed in her brain / a stroke. Which is strange, also as her sister, my nan, also had a bleed in her brain, but luckily survived. But that's what's caused her vascular dementia. Anyway, we were very upset and felt awful that she'd laid there all that time. I eventually fell asleep that night and was awoken by a text at 3:10 in the morning. It was from my auntie's phone number. She had a pay-as-you-go phone and hadn't added credit for years. It had no credit to text or call. I tried it when we got her belongings. The phone was in her empty flat once they removed her body. The text was blank and didn't say anything at all. But with no credit and no one to send it to me, I truly believe this was my aunt, somehow trying to contact me. This is my husband's story. It's always creeped us out. The first few times he told me the story, I just told him he probably had a weird dream. But he's insistent that this was not a dream. We've searched the web many nights trying to find an explanation or a similar story, but there's nothing. So tonight, I said tell me the story again. I'll put it online, see if anyone has experienced something similar. I don't know why we didn't do this earlier, honestly. Here we go. I spent most of 2015 woofing in Europe. For 2 months, I was working at a healing centre in Kilkenny Island. One night, after the owner and I watched a movie, Dirty Dancing, irrelevant, but I know people will ask, we both went to our own bedrooms. I got ready for bed, laid down, plugged my phone in, and saw it was 10:08 at night. I laid on the bed, on my back, facing the ceiling, and closed my eyes. Almost immediately, something made me want to open my eyes. The moment I did, both my legs were lifted upward toward the ceiling. I was then dragged by my feet to the foot of the bed, and then straight off of the bed onto the floor. I couldn't feel it when I hit the floor. I was then dragged over to the wall. My legs were still lifted up towards the ceiling, and were now flush with the wall. I realized I wasn't in control of my body. As I stood up, turned around and faced the door leading to the hall. My body walked down the hall, very slowly, arms at my side. I couldn't talk or move my body myself, but could feel that I was being moved like a puppet. I walked all the way downstairs, through the kitchen and dining room, back into the living room where I had just been watching a movie. I sat down on the couch, but did not sink it. Sat more like a robot on the edge of the couch, my arms limp at my sides. I'm facing the fireplace and I just stared straight forward for about 2 minutes. While I sat there, I couldn't speak or move, but my mind was racing with questions and fear about what was going on. I don't know exactly how to say this, but here it goes. As I was sitting there, my body felt like it wasn't still. Like I could feel my body slightly shifting in place as if I was just sitting there. After the 2 or so minutes of this, I get up and stare straight ahead for a moment, then retrace my steps slowly back through the dining room and kitchen, back up the stairs, through the hall, back into my bedroom. I lay down on my bed, still not feeling at all in control of my body. I close my eyes and open them again, and I've regained control of my body. Everything is fine. I figured I had dreamed the whole thing and looked at my clock expecting it to be the middle of the night, which would further justify my assumption that it was all just a dream. But it was only 10:14 p.m. I used to work as a cleaner when I was 16, and between colleges. This is the UK, so I'd already left school. The place I worked was a popular clothing store near my house and built over ancient farmland. Also, rumours of Druid burial grounds nearby, but that's another story. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal from a very young age, but this was by far the most haunted place I've ever worked, and my first apparition sighting. We were a team of 4 to 5, and all of us were assigned to different parts of the store. One of the sections was the women's fitting rooms. We would vacuum the rugs and cubicles, polish the mirrors and all of that. You would hear high heels on the tiles the whole time you were down there, and the sounds of rustling paper, coat hangers rattling, etc. General feeling of discomfort and unease, as though you were being followed and watched. This is hours before the store opened, so no customers. Sometimes a manager would be there, but they stayed upstairs in the office. The next part was the men's clothing area, which was on the second floor. When you cleaned there, you were alone, but for the occasional manager walking through. One time I was on the floor cleaning the railings by the cash registers, and a huge black shadow swept over me. I was surprised because I hadn't heard anybody approach, and as I looked around, I was definitely alone. My cleaning routine was to sweep the floor and collect the dirt into little piles around the pillars, then sweep it all up in one go at the end. The dirt piles moved constantly. I would go back to do the final big sweep, and some of the piles had disappeared. After I clocked out, the piles would be there again. I had a sense that the spirit was a young male farmhand and mischievous. Said as much to my co-worker, and she told me she refuses to clean that area after polishing the mirrors one day and seeing the disembodied head of a young man peering over her shoulder. Again, the sound of coat hangers rattling and shuffling noises, but I never felt threatened by it. Used to laugh it off or tell the spirit to stop, and he would most of the time. Now after the store was clean, we would clean the staff quarters. Toilet and canteen, meeting rooms. The toilets were a non-paranormal horror in themselves. Note, I worked here with my mother. We were assigned to clean the female toilets, and usually, if somebody was using them, we would leave and give them privacy until they finished. We went in, the middle store was closed, and we heard rustling paper and heavy breathing, so we left and waited. And waited. And waited. The cleaning cupboard was right next to the toilets and didn't even have a door. We would have seen and heard somebody leaving. To leave and enter the toilets, you would have to walk straight past the open doorway and then walk down the corridor that directly faced it. An L-shaped corridor with the toilets on the far end and the cleaning cupboard on the corner. Except when we went in after waiting for 10 or 15 minutes, the middle store was wide open and empty. Now onto the apparition. Children's clothing area was generally less creepy. Coat hangers moving again, Sometimes things would fall off the shelves and rails, but we shrugged it off. The elevator was directly opposite the children's clothing, and we usually loaded our cleaning equipment into the elevator because it was too heavy to carry up the stairs. I remember rinsing my mop out and I glanced up. There was a little boy around 6 or 7 years old standing directly in front of me. He wore a flat cap, a pale shirt with suspenders, dark shorts and socks up to his knees. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, and when I blinked, he was gone. I was just tired and shook my head. Spoke to my mother about it later, as she is Wiccan, and super into the supernatural, and described the boy to her. She had seen the exact same child a few weeks before, but only the back of him, like he was walking around a corner. She told me she had the feeling he had died of a lung-related sickness, perhaps tuberculosis or pneumonia. So I heard my mom telling this one to other people. It happened in the village she comes from. A young mother of two was sick and knew she was going to die soon. And the woman had like a gathering place where they met every night. And the woman told the other women to not let her children starve after she died, because her family was poor with no husband, and only her mother-in-law was alive. Soon after, she really died. The older of the two sons she had was just a first grader. But where we live, people believe that the soul of the dead roams the earth for 40 days before it continues. A few days after she died, strange things started happening in the neighbourhood. Loud laughs, weeps and whispers could be heard at night. My maternal grandma would just come out on the balcony and yell that she's looking out for her children, and the voices would stop. This continued for some time, until once her kids saw her inside their house. They chased her around the house, until she went under a table or something, and the kids called their grandma to see their mom. She came and could only see a pair of eyes in the dark under the table. She told her not to come anymore, and that her children would be okay. And she disappeared. At the same moment, she supposedly slammed the door of the church in anger, probably. It was heard very loud, because the church was nearby. I'm not sure I got this part correctly, but they supposedly went to the river and sent a bread basket with bread and wine downstream to help the dead person move on. You supposedly can't look back at the basket after you send it downstream, otherwise it won't work, because the dead one also needs to continue without looking back or something like that. That very night, some people saw her enter the church peacefully, and she never appeared again. Around 2008, my brother-in-law and his wife moved into a farmland rental home in a blink-and-you'll-miss-it town. Seriously, just a few old homes and an old woman general store. One night they asked my husband and I over for a few drinks and to tour the house. Since I was a new and nervous driver, I drank nothing. The house itself had an eerie vibe from the get-go, despite it appearing very normal, inside and out. However, the basement gave me chills. The space was divided into many different small rooms, some of which you could only access from another room. They used it as storage space, but I couldn't breathe down there and got out as soon as I could. Later that evening, we all sat in the living room chatting, everyone else enjoying wine. I kept catching glimpses of someone walking by, and sometimes stopping and looking in through the opening to the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He wore a checkered shirt and appeared to have rust-coloured hair. As we were leaving late that night, my husband, his brother and I had a smoke in the garage. They both flicked their butts out the back door, which opened to the complete blackness of a wheat field. Not seeing an ashtray anywhere, I went to do the same. Wouldn't do this now, but hindsight is 2020. As soon as I leaned out the door, I heard and felt the force of several vicious dogs barking right in my face. I jumped back, and a small scream escaped before I looked back at the others, and I realised from their looks that they had heard nothing. Trying not to appear crazy, I kept it all to myself for that moment. My husband and I got in his car, and as I turned on the ignition, I told him, I'm so scared right now. You're not going to believe what just happened in there. And as I pulled out of the driveway, our headlights burnt out. I drove home with the fog lights on and did not sleep at all that night. I never told my brother-in-law and his wife until they moved years later. They too had experienced real-life creepiness from the ex-dwellers, but are not necessarily tuned into the paranormal. I have a feeling they would have moved much sooner if they had been, and perhaps not moved in at all. In around 2005, I was abroad on a student/work visa, and my then boyfriend and I moved into a cute little flat above the local chemist's in a small English village, and I worked in the local pub directly across the road. The flat was dated, floral carpeting, layers of various coloured paint on the cupboards, but still had a lot of the original turn of the century charm of the building itself. We were extremely happy there, but things started to happen the very first night. While I laid awake next to my sleeping boyfriend, let's call him Jay, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning, the door opening and closing, and then footsteps coming up the back stairs. I started frantically smacking Jay and whispering, "Someone's in the flat! Someone's coming!" He woke up, turned on the lights, and grabbed something heavy to investigate. Nothing. No one. We continued to hear this on and off throughout our year living there. Other odd things would happen, such as the oven timer, old-fashioned manual dial, would go off in the middle of the day when I was home alone, and once our window opened on its own. I started to have dreams that a small boy with dark hair, an old-fashioned dress shirt, knee socks, suspenders and crap, was silently following me around the apartment. Perhaps it planted ideas in my head, but I started to notice quick glimpses of a short person out of the corner of my eye. The creepiest incident was again while we were in bed. The door to the bedroom opened ever so slowly. I started to freak out a bit as the thick shag carpeting on the floor made it hard to open and close the door. Jay attempted to explain it away with the wind from an open window, and I reluctantly accepted that, saying, "Well, it better not close." And wouldn't you know, it started closing so slowly, and you could hear it dragging against the carpet. I had to put my head under the covers that time. We continued living there quite happily for about a year, and got used to the quirks. As I became friends with some of the local patrons at the pub, I would open up about the flat. Many people knew someone who had lived there over the years, and there was always a story to tell. One boy around my age said that his nan lived there and would look after him there as a toddler. His nan would hear the pitter-patter of children's feet and come in the room to scold him, only to find him napping peacefully. She also experienced the horror of having knives fly across the kitchen. Though I'm not sure what happened there. I never experienced anything truly harmful like that. It was fascinating and validating to hear other tales of this old building. I work in the Chelsea district of Manhattan, and to the best of my knowledge, the building I work in doesn't have any supernatural or paranormal history. But it's New York City, so who knows? And personally, I've never had any kind of paranormal experience, and I honestly don't count this as one. I'm more so filing it away as something weird that happened to me a few years ago. I work in a work/life hybrid building, so both apartments and office space are in the same building. In my particular office, half the space is an office, and the other half is my boss's personal living space when he's in the city. We have a very small, loose office environment since different employees work internationally, and we're allowed to make our own hours, so long as we're responsible with work output. Because of this, I prefer to work early, very early, as in getting to the office at 6:30 a.m. and leaving at 3 p.m. So I'm alone in the office for several hours usually. The particular morning in question, I was alone in my own office with the door open. The main room has large windows, and the morning sun was just starting to shine through them. My boss was travelling through Europe, and no one else was working at that time. I'd say this was between 7 to 8:30 a.m. I was typing emails at my computer, and from the corner of my eye, I saw a figure walk from my boss's living space, through the main office area, and to my boss's office. I was startled because I thought I was alone, but sometimes my boss allows his friends to sleep in his private quarters and doesn't let the employees know. And we've been surprised before. And because my boss doesn't always befriend the most trustworthy of people, I assumed his guest was up to no good, looking for something in his office. "Hello?" I said. No one answered, and my heartbeat started to increase. I stood up, walked out of my office, and approached the door of my boss's offices. It was shut, and I really didn't want to open it to see what was going on behind it. I knocked. "Hello?" I said again. There wasn't a response. I decided to be brave, swallowed, and started to twist the doorknob, but it didn't move. The door was locked. I jostled the knob a bit more to be sure, but it didn't move. My eyes went wide. I turned around, and I walked back to my boss's living space. Both bedrooms were empty. The beds were made and untouched, and there were no luggage anywhere. And so I went back to my desk and continued to work as if nothing happened. I didn't share the experience with anyone because I assumed I'd just be met with eye rolls and "wow, that's so weird" remarks. I didn't feel threatened at all, just disturbed a bit. Sometime later, my coworker mentioned that at times the apartment is creepy and he doesn't know how I can spend as much time as I do in it alone. I said that not only do I not mind it, but I actually prefer it. But I then decided to share my story, and I delivered it in the most matter-of-fact way possible. My coworker went quiet for a while, and then told me it's funny I mentioned something spooky, because one morning when he was there alone, I was working from home, he noticed that a rolling coat rack where my boss stored his suits was in the main office area. It's assumed one of his friends or guests put it there, which isn't uncommon. But out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the suits moving as if they were slowly being sorted through. We share the same office, so he has the same view that I do. And like me, he called out "hello," but there was no reply. So he stood up to inspect the rack, and no one was there. He too went into the living area, but no one was there. The beds were made, and there was no luggage. And he too went back to work, a bit unnerved, but decided not to say anything. Somewhat recently, I was yet again in the office early, and no one else was there. And as I was talking toward the kitchen, from the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing in the door of the living area and turned to look, but no one was there. This time, however, I didn't bother looking in the bedrooms, because I knew the answer I'd find. When I was young, I stayed at my aunt's house a lot due to my mom and dad working a lot. There were many times that my younger brother and I stayed overnight. The house we stayed at was located on Roseway Road in El Paso, Texas. I knew nothing about the paranormal at the time, but little did I know what I would witness would change my life forever. My aunt was on the phone talking with someone, and I was watching TV. It was daytime, and what she started talking about caught my attention. She said, "Well, last night I walked into my husband's room, and I saw an old lady in a white dress, standing over him, just watching him." My uncle and aunt didn't have a very good relationship due to his abuse of alcohol, so my aunt would sleep in the living room on the sofa. Then she said, "Then the old lady looked up at me and stared for about 30 seconds and just vanished." The story shook me as I overheard her words as she spoke on the phone. I wasn't comfortable in her house anymore. Days later, I heard her talking on the phone again, saying maybe this lady left unfinished business behind. My aunt believed that her house contained maybe some kind of buried treasure, or that this lady left money buried within the house. I didn't believe her. I thought maybe she watched too many movies. One night, my whole family had a family gathering, and we sat at the dining room table playing cards. Of course, my father and uncles were drinking and all were having a good time. The table was followed by the kitchen down a dark hallway that led to all the bedrooms. Down the dark hallway, a tall black shadow walked by, and I quickly turned my head to see who it was. It wasn't human. And it was all black from head to toe. I didn't notice that the whole table of my family suddenly grew quiet. They all stared down to the dark hallway. One of my uncles said, "Did you see that?" Everybody at the table had a shocked look on their faces. My uncle then said, "There's someone in the house." He then got up and headed toward to follow the shadow to investigate. He then came back and said, "Nobody is over there, and all the rooms are dark and quiet." The mood quickly changed, and the night was no longer fun for anybody. Years later, my family had a Thanksgiving get-together once again at my aunt's house on Roseway. At the time, camcorders were a big thing. This was the 90s, so yeah. The sun went down, and all of the family was watching TV in the living room. I started playing with the camcorder and started to record. I thought it was so cool and walked around the house with it. My aunt said, "John, don't go far. The rooms are dark and nobody is in them. Please leave the doors to the rooms closed." I agreed and went on with my adventure with this device that astonished me. Hey, I was a kid, so anything like this in the 90s blew my mind. I walked to my uncle's bedroom, filming as I walked. Then I thought to myself, imagine if something were to happen. How cool would it be to capture it on camera? I stopped at the closed door and I heard light scratching. Then from the other side of the door, I heard 3 knocks and suddenly the door started opening. I thought to myself, maybe somebody is in there. As the door opened, the room was pitch black dark. Then I saw as the door opened there was a tall shadow standing near the bed of my uncle. I ran screaming and my dad asked me what was going on. I told him what happened and he brushed it off as I saw things. I showed him the video that I recorded and he quickly said, "Who is that?" He got up and went to my uncle to show him. They both looked confused and my uncle walked to his room. He checked the room and came back to tell us nobody was in there. I was scared from then on in that house. Over the years growing up, I would see the shadow all the time. It was usually quick, then disappeared. When I was about 14, my cousin had a friend over. Outside in the backyard, my uncle had a huge garage. It looked like a warehouse, and he and my 2 cousins would work on cars. My cousin's friend kept looking around and looked very uncomfortable. He then told my cousin that he had to leave. My cousin asked why. Then his friend said, "The spirits are making me really uncomfortable." He said that he was sensitive and that he could see spirits. I didn't believe him and laughed. Then he told my cousin that there were many spirits here and some of them had bad intentions. He said that one was a man dressed like an Indian. He then said some of these sports are angry because this was their land and now you live here. My cousin's friend quickly left and never came back after that. I just thought he was crazy. The radio in the garage would turn on at random times during the night on max. The music that would play would be oldies. It would turn off and turn on many times. A couple of years later, I was about 17 years old and I needed extra money. My uncle told me if I cleaned the yard, he'd give me $50. I jumped on it quickly. I showed and started cleaning the yard. It was a huge yard next to the garage. The sun was going down and I was finishing cutting the grass. Suddenly, the grass mower turned off and I couldn't get it on. I messed with it and as I looked to get it working again, I could see a silhouette of a person standing right in front of me. I turned quickly to see who was watching me and no one was there. I had the chills and I felt very uneasy after this. I got the grass mower working again and finished as fast as I could. I had the feeling the whole time that someone or something was watching me. This was my last encounter. My uncle that owned the house ended up divorcing my aunt. My aunt moved out. My uncle soon got in trouble with the law and he was involved in embezzling money from the city. He went to court and ended up going to jail. The land that my uncle and aunt lived on turned out to belong to the city and was never paid for. My uncle lost the house and the land. He got out of jail and soon passed away after being released. My wife has a hard time going to funerals and I made her go to this one. I wasn't really close to my uncle, but I grew up spending a remainder of my time growing up in that house. That night, my soundbar to my television turned on at 3:20 a.m. Static came through, and we could hear what sounded like church music or a choir song. My wife freaked out, and soon after, the sound bar turned off. I really don't know what it was on the sound bar. It could be anything. The land that my uncle owned is still there on Roseway Road in El Paso, Texas. The house and garage were torn down, and all that remains there is an empty lot. I hope he can rest in peace. I believe everything happens for a reason. These experiences got me into the paranormal, and I ended up being a ghost hunter. These experiences shaped me into the person I am today. I have many other stories, but that's for another time. So I bought some authentic Victorian era photos on Etsy. It just matches with my aesthetic, and I buy old stuff like that all the time. But now it feels kind of different. I received them in the mail last night, and all the photos was fine, except for one of three women that was a close-up portrait that kind of made me feel uneasy right off the bat. I really didn't think anything of it, and put the pictures back in the mailing envelope, and they've been sitting on my floor in my room ever since. Fast forward to this morning, I was getting ready to go to work, and I was kind of in a hurry. I was standing in my bathroom fixing my hair, with the door closed, and from downstairs, I heard a really clear feminine voice call out, "Hello?" It was so loud that it filled the house. Like it really sounded as if someone was standing at the foot of the staircase, yelling up to me. I froze what I was doing, and I thought someone else was home. I called my mom to check if she stayed home from work, because she leaves earlier for her job than I do for mine. And I kept her on the phone just in case I was murdered by an intruder. But I got downstairs and looked at our security cameras. I was the only one home, and the house was clear. Obviously, I'm not sure what I heard, but I do actually participate in ghost hunting with a family friend. So I'm always a skeptic, trying to debunk things rather than immediately believing that it's a ghost. The timing of this is just so coincidental with the photos that I bought. And it really didn't hit me until I was halfway to work this morning that, hey, maybe it has something to do with the photos I bought. The listing on Etsy was advertising that it was from my grandmother's personal album, whom I'm assuming had just passed away. And I didn't stop to think about why the seller would be trying to get rid of personal photos like that until now. We lived in an old house from the early 1900s. It always felt peaceful and calm. No trouble with anything paranormal for the first 15 years we lived there. Then, our youngest child was born about 3 years ago. This all began when we moved him into his own room. His bedroom was previously occupied by my boy-girl twins. We split them up, the boy going in with his older brother, the girl moving to a room at the other end of the hall. The room was always fine when they were in it, but ever since the baby moved into that room, things have been weird. The hallway outside his room often sounds like someone is walking up or down it, even though they're not. That bedroom seems darker than the other rooms upstairs. The baby is scared of one corner in particular. He can't seem to tell me what he doesn't look. But ever since he's been tiny, he points at that corner and shakes his head no. He often has nightmares in that room. He never did when he slept in our room. The noises used to be only upstairs, but over the last year, they've been spreading over the house. Footsteps all over. Doors shutting. A few bars of music were heard. So many footsteps. And once, I heard and felt something walk up and sit next to me on the couch. I'm not the only one who hears these things. My wife, my oldest son, my mother-in-law, we joke about our ghost, but it's starting to creep me out more and more. I don't know why, but I cannot shake the idea that this ghost or spirit is somehow connected to my youngest son. They feel related somehow. What should I do? We've tried ignoring it. My sister burned some sage and put some crystals under his bed and a Virgin Mary candle in his closet. I don't know much about these things. She's way more into the paranormal thing than I am. How do I make a ghost or spirit go away when it might somehow be tied to my child? Is that even possible? 4 years ago, my great-grandmother passed away at the age of 98. We were close all the way into my adult years, so the death hit me hard. She lived in a one-story house in a rural town 30 minutes outside of Springfield, Missouri. Her house sat on a large and heavily forested piece of land. There was a large hill several hundred feet behind the house that dropped off into a creek. I spent almost my entire childhood staying on this piece of land and had learned how to take care of it in the house. After the funeral service, I volunteered to stay and take care of the land while my family decided on what to do with it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to buy the land, so I wanted to spend as much time out of there as I could. My first 3 days I spent packing up items and cleaning the house. The nearest neighbour was 5 miles away, so I didn't have to worry about unwanted guests that would get in the way of my packing and disturbed my personal way of mourning the loss of someone so close to me. The 4th day is when the odd events started occurring. I slept in a sleeping bag in the living room, and when I woke up, I immediately screamed. A few inches away from my face was a dead copperhead snake. It was normal for snakes and other small animals to get in the house, so seeing the snake wasn't surprising. It was the fact that it was so close to my face and it could have bitten me at any moment while I was sleeping. I briefly wondered why the snake had just come into the house and died, because there were no physical signs that anything was wrong with it. So I threw it outside and continued with my day, and the weird event was almost forgotten. Later that evening, I decided to go for a walk through the woods, to enjoy the nice weather and reminisce about the good times I'd had in the woods and all the games I used to play. I was walking along an old path that led to a well. The path was narrow and was close to the drop-off that led to the creek. I heard a branch snap behind me and instinctively turned my head. I didn't see anything, so I assumed it was an animal and continued walking. Just a few minutes later, I heard a snap to my left and turned to look again, but I still didn't see anything. I started to worry that I was being stalked by something, but it was rare to see large animals in this area, so I continued walking. I heard a third snap directly in front of me, but now instead of being worried, I was upset. I was convinced that someone else was out here trying to scare me, so I shouted at what I assumed to be a person, "Go away!" And everything went uncomfortably silent. But I started to hear footsteps approaching in front of me, but I couldn't see anything. They got faster and faster until whoever or whatever it was running right at me. I covered my face with my arms and waited to be attacked by some invisible person, but the footsteps stopped. I slowly lowered my arms, but instead of seeing a person, a bobcat, or even a bear, I saw a gigantic spider in the middle of a web I hadn't noticed before. If I would have taken one more step, I would have ended up being bitten. I turned and ran as fast as I could through the overgrowth and back to the house. I was spooked, but I was out in the middle of the woods, and sometimes things like this happened. I knew this land and the house well, so I pushed through the night and the next 2 days. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. I started yard work my second week staying out of the house, and it wasn't bad. I'd actually found some old trinkets from my childhood that I'd buried under a tree. While I was picking up fallen branches from a storm the previous night, I noticed a clump of hair was caught in one of them. I remember its colour being brown and black, and considered the possibility of it being a rare encounter with a bear, but there were no tracks that I could see. I brushed it off again, but I was starting to think that maybe someone else was staying on the property, and that upset me. I decided to stay up late to see if I could catch the person in the act. Nothing happened until around 2 a.m. I remember everything so vividly because of how terrified I was. It started with branches crunching and the sound of the wheelbarrow I'd been using earlier falling over. I readied my flashlight and a small knife, just in case whoever it was got violent. I heard them step onto the front porch and pull at the screen door, but they quickly abandoned it and instead started walking around the house. I could hear them scraping something sharp against the house, and I was furious. I stood up and shined my flashlight at the nearest window that I assumed the person was standing near and shouted at them, "I have a weapon! Get off of this property now!" Everything stopped, and I was positive that whoever it was had left, until I heard something slam against the window so hard, I was surprised it didn't break. My flashlight shined on the person, and at first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. It had long dark hair with eyes that were way too big for its face. Its skin was wrinkled and reminded me of a naked mole rat. It pressed its face against the glass and fogged it up with its breath. I heard it run around the house several times and bang on every wall, window, and the door every time it passed them. This went on for hours, and I was too scared to move or do anything. I was completely alone, being tormented by some strange monster. Every now and then, I'd get the courage to shine my flashlight and catch a glimpse of the thing. Each time I saw it, it looked more animal-like. All I could do was cry and wait for it to go away. Finally, just after sunrise, the running and banging stopped, but I didn't dare move until well after 9 a.m. It took all of my courage to open the front door and see what damage had been done to the house and yard after the terrifying experience from the night before. But there was nothing. No footprints, no scratches against the house or broken or cracked windows. It was almost like I'd imagined the whole thing, but I knew what I saw and had experienced was real. Nothing else happened for the rest of my stay there, and by the end of the month, my grandfather came to pick me up and take care of the belongings I'd packed away. I was still terrified by what had happened, but I'd almost convinced myself that I'd imagined it, until my grandfather spoke to me. He told me that he was happy that this land was being sold and how much he hated growing up here. When I asked him why, his answer seemed to validate my experience. Now, my grandfather is a serious, no-nonsense man. He was the type of person that stayed quiet, but when he did speak, you'd better listen, because it was important. He was a hardened war veteran and devoted Christian, so things like paranormal and supernatural were just fairy tales to him. He made sure to tell his children and me and the rest of my siblings and cousins that. He told me how his mother, my great-grandmother, would always try to scare him and his sister with stories about the land being guarded by monsters. The story says that these monsters, hybrids is what we call them, were the children of falsely accused witches. The people living in the area back when this was going on claimed that the children were part witch and part animal and needed to be killed, so they were left in the forest to die. He said that when the witch children died, they came back as spirits and claimed the woods as their own, and any unwelcome visitors would be tortured until they were literally scared to death. Just how their falsely accused mothers had been scared when they had been killed. My grandfather said he didn't believe in much outside of his religion, but had believed that the hybrids were real, and that he had been tormented by one when he tried to go hunting in the woods for the first time and shot his first deer. He believed he had upset the hybrids by killing an innocent animal and never stepped foot on the land with a weapon, and they finally left him alone. Maybe this is a foolish thing to believe, but I believe that the story my grandfather told me is true, simply because we both had similar terrifying experiences. If I'd had a camera, I would have tried to take a picture of the creature, or if I could draw, I'd post a picture of the drawing. I remember every detail about what I saw and would be burned into my memory forever. All of my childhood memories seem tainted now because of this experience, and now I don't think I'm going to miss the land as much as I first thought. It didn't take long for the land and the house to be sold. The hybrids, or whatever is out there, can be somebody else's nightmare. One night was more than enough for me. I was in the car last night, around 5 in the morning with my best friend, who I'll refer to as H. We wanted to watch the sunrise, but we live in a pretty big city, so we're trying to find a flat, high place where we could see the sky. Basically, I was just driving east until I found an empty parking lot or something. I guess we got distracted with the conversation because I drove probably farther than I should. And then suddenly, there weren't any buildings or lights around, just darkness and a few trees. Up ahead, by a stop sign, there was a squarish grey shape that was lighter than the surrounding areas, and we both leaned forward and squinted to see it. He asked what it was, and I said, "It's where the road goes up," or something like that. It was really dark, so I wasn't positive, but I was pretty sure. I think she said something else after that, but I don't really remember. It was just a normal conversation. The road suddenly dipped, and I drove up the slight incline. I'm almost to the stop sign at the end, and then it hits us at the same time. Something is wrong. This feeling slams into me all at once. The air goes still, the car goes quiet, and without looking, I know my friend feels it too. I've never felt anything like it. Fear, I guess, but different somehow. My ears and the back of my neck were really hot, like that feeling just before you pass out. Like when you've stood too long with your knees locked. But I was wide awake. My heart was tight in my chest like someone had wrapped a hand around it, and I felt sick to my stomach, but not like I was going to throw up. I feel like I'm not describing this well enough. It's kind of indescribable, but that's the gist of it. It was like my body knew something my mind didn't. The word pure comes to mind. Primal. This all hits me in the few seconds it takes me to get to the stop sign. When I pull up to it, I see that right in front of us is a roadblock with a big yellow sign on it. Dead end. My heart beats so fast I couldn't even feel of it. Neither of us were breathing. I'm not sure if I imagined it or not, but somehow the woods around us got even darker. Like unnaturally dark. Black. I get this thought or feeling that I have to get out of here right now. Turn around, my best friend says quietly. I don't look at her, but her voice is deadly serious. My head runs through the scenario impossibly fast, it felt like. Adrenaline or something. The road was too tight, so if I tried to turn around the way we came, I'd either hit a tree or would have to stop, reverse, stop, put it in drive. No thanks. I turned left instead, speeding out of there, and as I drove farther away, the horrible feeling gradually lessened until it was less cold-blooded fear and more deep-seated discomfort. Did you feel that? He said, when we finally got to the stoplight and saw a building. We started talking to each other about it. I'm like, bro, what was that? And H was actually said it first, but apparently in the moment, we thought the exact same thing. I'm about to see something. I remember looking around in the dark when it happened, and I was sure I was going to see something. I don't even know what I was expecting, but I was just positive about it. H said she looked away from the windows, but I was driving, and I didn't really get the urge to look away for some reason anyway. I don't know. I know nothing really happened, but this really spooked me. H said something like, maybe it was an animal hiding in the woods, or maybe there was a dead body, or a murderer. And murderers are pretty bad, you know. But that feeling I got, I don't know. No logical human explanation feels sinister enough. I pulled up a satellite view on my phone where we were, and there's not really much going on in the immediate area. Past the dead end sign, the woods got thicker, and the road turns into gravel, and eventually leads to this non-profit organisation. Some kind of little church organisation. There's a few little buildings built in a circle, and what seems to be mobile homes or RVs or something, and 2 or 3 houses, all in this little clearing in the middle of the woods. There's also a little river past that. Other than that, there's just not really anything around there. I haven't stopped thinking about this since it happened. I guess I'm just curious what you think about it. Any theories? Any kind of explanation? Please? My father passed away in December. He died of COVID-19, but kept the illness from us. When we checked up on him, he was gone in a couple of days. It's devastated us, his children. My brother and I are looking at his affairs while it's being sorted in probate. He left a lot of things unfinished. This morning, I got out of work at 4 a.m, but because there was a citywide parking ban and he owns a tenant building, I decided to just go and do the needed cleanup. There are many times that I've had an unsettling feeling while in his apartment, attic or basement. I tried to keep my mind on the work at hand or on other things in my life while doing cleaning up at his house. Most of the time it works. I go in and hours later, nothing. No vibe. Business as usual. Today, it was not. His apartment gave me instant vibes. The attic as well. Big time in the attic. So much I narrowed my vision to not look into dark corners. The basement was quiet, no vibes. When my brother showed up to help, we got to reminiscing about our father. He took it hard and he cried a bit. After comforting him, we finished up. I asked him to instead go to his apartment and attic and make sure all was secure, given my vibes earlier. I decided to go to the basement where I assumed all was quiet and clear and put all the tools back. Going down the steps, it was thick with what felt like apprehension, like someone was there watching. Huge vibes. I narrowed my vision, finished, and got out quickly. I went out to my father's garage to also secure the doors. Nothing, no vibes there. After waiting for my brother to show up so he could leave at the same time, he came out and was unnerved. I asked what happened, and he told me he was just in the basement getting something he had forgotten. He told me he heard someone calling out his name twice from the shadows. Thinking I was pranking him, he said to cut it out, but soon realised he was alone. He couldn't get out quick enough. My brother is the sensitive part of the family. He sees a lot and hears more than the rest of us, and doesn't let us in on what he really sees, I feel. I only get the vibes when something is around sometimes. I'm very superstitious, and I believe that my father is lingering about this building. I'm trying to get a priest to come by to bless his apartment and other areas when I go on vacation soon. This happened a few years ago. However, I've recently started to have some weird activity in my new apartment. I was spending the night at my then boyfriend's house. I don't remember the exact time, but it was somewhere between midnight to 3 a.m. His room was upstairs. So I go downstairs to go to the bathroom, grab a drink of water. I didn't bother turning the lights on. I knew my way around the house. As I'm walking back through the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was something in front of me, a tall black shadow. I reached my arms out thinking I was going to run into something. It was Christmas time, so I thought it was the Christmas tree. The only lights coming in were the dim lights from the street that were a few yards from the house. There was 1,000% something in front of me. I could see the outlines of everything else in the room, and light in front of me was just black. I could see around it. I felt super uneasy, just like I wasn't alone. I really can't explain the feeling. The next morning, I tried to justify what happened, looked around the room, thinking it was a shadow from the tree, but there was not enough lights coming in to even make a shadow. The lights from outside were way too far from the house. Fast forward a couple nights later. We're sleeping. It's once again late between midnight and 3 a.m. I wake up to the sound of pictures flying off his dresser. The pictures were like tucked into the sides of the mirror on his dresser. There was probably 5 of them. They all just flew off. There was no fan, no window open, and no way of those pictures just falling out by themselves. They were really in there. Next thing you know, I hear his closet creak open just a slight, and footprints that sounded like they ran to the side of the bed. Like loud running footsteps. He grabbed me so tight. Now at my apartment, I keep seeing things out the corner of my eyes. A couple nights ago, a huge painting fell off my wall. This thing is fairly heavy, and it was up there. I'm really scared that these encounters are going to get worse. Without sharing anything too personal, the paranormal experience in my family did not start with me. My family has lived a lifetime of weird and unexplained events, in which he believes stemmed from the strange practices of my grandmother, who gave a shot at witchcraft back in the late 70s and 80s. These experiences that were lived through by my father granted him great amounts of interest into the paranormal world, which led him into his current position of owning a ghost hunting team in our home state of Colorado. Some of his earliest and most memorable experiences were back when he was in grade school. Apparently, his mother had been trying to learn some spells and/or rituals of witchcraft in order to reach into the veil or talk to her spirits. Something or other. These practices must have worked because they didn't just affect my grandmother. In fact, they brought down a lot of havoc on my young father. My dad tells me that when he was about 6, he once woke in his bed to look up and see a balloon floating in his doorway. The balloon wasn't moving, and then suddenly it was. Ever so slowly, the balloon started to steadily float to his bedside, right next to where his head was. After a moment, it sunk to the floor. Whatever it was that my grandmother brought in, it started toying with my father. I never heard what his reaction was to this, or what happened after. What I do remember is that when he told me that, it scared me so bad, because it reminded me of the movie It. Unfortunately for my dad, he didn't just see balloons in his room while he was in bed. When he was about 20 years old, he was enlisted in the United States Air Force. He lived in the dorm rooms on a base down in Tampa Bay, Florida, which is where he met my mother. The following event is amongst one of the most terrifying things that have ever happened to my father. One night in the dorms, my young parents were sound asleep, crammed up on a twin-sized bed in the corner of their room. My dad tells me that he half woke up and saw something on the edge of the bed. He opened his eyes a little wider to get a better view at whatever it was that he was seeing, and he saw some sort of figure, partially slouched over the bed, watching them. He was able to make out some details, but he thought he was just seeing things. So he rubbed his eyes and sat up a little, but the figure was still there. He wasn't just seeing things. He says that whatever it was not a person. He says that it looked amphibious, like it was some sort of wet and alienish, almost gargoyle-looking creature. He was obviously frozen in fear, and he tried to blink a few times because he told himself there was no way in hell that this thing was real. When the creature did not go away, my dad started to shake my mother awake in a frantic state of panic. He says that when my mother awoke and asked what the hell was going on, the creature was just gone, vanished. When I had first heard the story, my mother told me that she remembers this event crystal clear. She said my father was extremely jumpy, high alert, and paranoid for the next 2 weeks, constantly looking in the rear-view mirror while driving, losing sleep, not going anywhere alone, etc. When I ask about it now, my dad tells me that he has absolutely zero idea what happened that night. He adds a bit more detail to the description of the creature, saying that if this was in fact a person, that he was in some sort of ridiculously high-end costume, that it would have been equipped with professional cosmetic features and body paint, which in that setting is almost less believable than it being something inhuman. How would someone like that even get in, let alone vanish? There are plenty of more terrifying stories from my father that could be shared, but now is the time I'll change the subject to myself. Just a little background. I was born and raised in Colorado, specifically in one of the many suburban homes outside of Denver. I've lived a very action-packed and paranormal 20 years. I believe that my experiences are due to my lineage and some sort of energies that have been passed down from my father and grandmother. Probably one of my earliest experiences was when I was about 3. Sitting in the back of my mom's Jeep, I had a very strange conversation with her that not only scared her, but now scares me to even think about. Apparently, my mother was driving us home one night, just her and I. And in the middle of the silent car ride, I asked my mother, where was I before this? Now, before you start to think that this is not a creepy question, just wait for it to thicken a bit. My mum laughed and told me, well, you just weren't here yet. You weren't born yet. She then had to listen to her toddler reply, no, where was I before that? My mother just repeated herself a few times, saying that I was not anywhere yet, that I wasn't born yet, that there was nothing before this. My mom would tell you today that I was getting frustrated that I could not get my question across in a way for her to understand. And I was only 3. How the hell would I even know to ask something like that? I was supposedly getting so irritated that I was not able to ask or explain my question to her in a way to get the answer that I wanted. She said it was like I had knowledge of something and that maybe I didn't quite understand it. That I needed her help to figure it out. Like whatever it was so normal to me that I figured my mom should definitely know what I was talking about. Fucking creepy if you ask me. As far as I know, Nothing ever furthered from that night in regards to my question, but I'll always be weirded out knowing that that was a real conversation that I had with my mother all those years ago. I still even remember bits and pieces of it in my own end. A more recent experience happened to me back in 2020. Have you ever heard of sleep paralysis? I'm sure you have. If you've never experienced an episode of sleep paralysis, I pray that you never go through it. Upon research, you'll find that the most common ages for sleep paralysis are late teens and early 20s. I started to experience sleep paralysis when I was about 5. I've been experiencing sleep paralysis pretty frequently since that age, and I've grown so used to it that it doesn't really faze me anymore. If you don't know what sleep paralysis is, here's a very short lesson. When the human brain is in its deepest state of sleep, it's called rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep for short. In this state, the most vivid dreams occur and your brain will paralyze your body. This is to ensure that you do not act out your dreams while you're sleeping. So if, for example, if I was in a deep sleep and had a dream about surfing, my body wouldn't be jumping up and hanging loose in my bed. Sometimes, however, if you wake up in the cycle of sleep, there's a chance that you can be fully conscious before your brain unparalyzes your body. And when this happens, you'll be stuck in place, not able to move a muscle. Not only that, but because you were just in REM sleep, both visual and audible hallucinations are very common in this state. This can last anywhere from a few seconds to sometimes even a minute or more. Now on to the story. I was in bed when I woke up, unable to move. I knew I was in paralysis, and by this point I was so grown up that I wasn't worried. I was just going to wait it out. I started to get freaked out when I hallucinated that I was in some sort of forest. Like my entire room was just now in a grey, foggy forest. I was stuck there in my bed, and at the edge of the forest I saw what looked like probably 3 or 4 all-black dogs. I could see them moving, pacing back and forth as if there was some sort of force field preventing them from coming any closer to me. But I could tell that they wanted to. I then heard a loud, and I mean loud, deep and croaky voice start speaking in my mind. It was speaking in a language I didn't understand. At this point, I'm scared shitless, and I can't wait to be out of here. It spoke angrily and impatiently said whatever the hell it was saying. The words started to turn into English after a bit. The only words I was able to make out were right back to hell. I then saw that the force field or barrier or whatever had faded away, and the dogs started making a dead sprint to me. I tried to scream. I could hear their paws hitting the leaves and their little whines as they desperately tried to race to me. I tried to thrash around. I tried to cry, but there was nothing. I was frozen and there was nothing I could do. As the dogs got closer, I could see that they were blurry. Like they were just jagged like shapes of dogs, and they were scribbled in black. Like some spots that they were not fully coloured in. They were like some very well shaded, underdeveloped drawings. Like a messed up Polaroid picture. As soon as the dogs landed on me, they went to bite and scratch at me. As soon as they made contact with me, I shot up in bed, in my actual bedroom, completely out of breath and sweating. Fear doesn't even come close to describing the feeling I felt that night. It goes without saying that I did not go back to sleep, and I was outright rattled from that experience. Since then, I've never had a sleep paralysis experience so bad. My dad tells me he used to get it real bad too. I woke up at 7 a.m. with my boyfriend while he got ready and left for work. I always do this, but I'm not much of a morning person, so I usually crawl into bed afterwards and try to catch more sleep, which is what I did. At about 8:30 to 9 a.m, not sure of the time, but I took the dog out at 9:30, so it had to be between then. I woke up feeling absolutely out of it. I was wrapped up in the blankets like usual on my side, facing the bathroom door, and the door to the bedroom was also on that side. Both were open, so Harley, the dog, could come in and out as she pleased. I thought maybe I just woke up from a weird dream and tried going back to sleep, But then I heard what sounded like a bang or a door being opened or shut, then something walking on the carpet by the bed. It sounded like it was slowly pacing around the room, then would stop, and it felt like it was leaning over me. It was so still and quiet in the room, I couldn't even hear the wind outside, which had been howling all morning. I also couldn't move at all, or speak, or open my eyes. As groggy and out of it I felt, I also felt wide awake and aware of everything going on around me, but was absolutely helpless. I felt incredibly panicked listening to whatever it was walking around the room. It was a feeling of absolute terror, and I was afraid something awful was going to happen to me. Then I heard what sounded like some sort of low growl coming by the doorway, which I assumed and hoped was Harley, and slowly the feeling of being freakishly scared went away, and I passed out. I woke up 30-ish minutes later to take Harley out to go potty, and went back to bed. Then woke up at about 10:50 when my boyfriend came home to do some work in the home office. I told him what had happened, and he checked the Ring doorbell and cameras we had set up, but he saw nothing. Harley had stayed in the living room at the time I think this happened, and there was nothing weird picked up on the camera. He said he hadn't been home either, so it wouldn't have been him. So, what was it? Was it some form of sleep paralysis, or was there something there in the room with me? My boyfriend had mentioned he thinks the house is haunted because he's seen a shadow / watched the bathroom door push back and forth, slowly on its own. But apart from hearing knocking on the wall one night when we were trying to sleep, I haven't seen or heard anything or felt anything creepy until this morning. I don't know what to think of it. Any insight?